What is up, you guys? This is the Dark and Rose here, and we're here with the final session for Tear of Light's Tell Me Something. To be honest, reading this again, I didn't realize how dark it got until we got halfway to the story. That's when shit starts picking up like crazy. And so here we are. We're going to be doing chapters 5 to 8, which are the final chapters. And I'm going to say in advance, thank you guys so much for listening to this story, because this story is awesome. I highly recommend Tear of Light stuff, like I said in the previous video. And well, let's get down to it. Actually, since I was sneezing a lot last session, I decided to take some allergy meds this time around. Just stuff that's like, you would generally buy for your medicine cabinet, like either in your kitchen or bathroom. Because I was sneezing a hell of a lot, and so far it's helping. I mean, my nose doesn't feel runny, or I don't feel like I'm sneezing hard or anything like that. And then again, I just took them before pressing the record button. So we'll have to see what happens. Alright, Chapter 5. The place where it all began. The place of Ruby's birth was not what Weiss expected. Situated on the snowy mountains far north of Beacon Academy in the east of the city of Vale, there was more snow than the eye could see. Their transport had dropped them off in a large, open snowy field next to what appeared to be a forest of dead trees. Weiss initially shivered at the sight of gnarled onyx limbs reaching skyward like claws. Somehow that image alone chilled her to the bone, more so than the biting cold on the mountain's side. Ruby was the first of the team to dismount the airjet, Yang quickly following suit with Blake and Weiss trailing behind. The air was still and frosty, the chill easily seeping down into Weiss's being, despite the heavy cloak she wore. Their cloaks were provided by Headmaster Ozpin, the Beacon Academy emblem embroidered on the flowing material. New Age, the Headmaster had called it, something about reflecting the wearer's own body heat back to them and hence keeping them warmer. Weiss rolled her eyes at that thought. She was still freezing in her typical white dress, the Schnee heiress rubbing her arms restlessly, all the while trying to keep her teeth from chattering. Blake seemed to mirror her discomfort, the black-haired girl wearing even less than Weiss herself. The moment they exited their transport, Blake was quick to pull her cloak tighter to her body. Yang clenched and unclenched her hands, her breath condensing in front of her in small puffs of white. If the rosy color on her nose and cheeks were any indication, the blonde was also cold, but Weiss doubted very much she noticed it. Violet eyes were focused on Ruby, the red cloak girl standing in front of them all, having neither moved nor said a word since stepping off of the airjet, their transport flying away not too long afterwards. Silver-colored eyes were raised to the sky, staring at something unseen, and for the next few minutes Team Ruby stood in silence, Weiss along with the other two girls waiting for their leader's direction. It was eerie, Weiss noted, just how silent and unmoving the younger girl was. Ruby was naturally a hyperactive ball of excitement, unable to sit still for more than minutes at a time. It was a trait that was both aggravating and annoying to Weiss, yet the white-haired girl wanted nothing more than just that right now. Ruby remained as still as a statue, and just as silent, making Weiss jittery. Just when it seemed they'd be going nowhere fast, it would be Yang who spoke up first. "Sis, this way," was all Ruby said. Soon after the scythe-wheeler started walking forward towards the dead forest of trees. Yang instinctively reached out a hand towards her younger sister, but her grab only met air as Ruby was steps ahead of them. Weiss gave the blonde a concerned look as she passed Yang by. Yang obviously still very bothered about the whole thing. Continuing forward out of the corner of her eye, Weiss saw Blake put a hand on the blonde's shoulder behind her. Yang sighed in defeat before following after them. Weiss turned back to the red-cloaked figure ahead, her hand on her master's pommel. The town of Daggerhorn was desolate, ravaged and fragmented, making Weiss's heart stop. Weiss didn't know how long it took for them to make it this far, the silence which enveloped the quartet suffocating. So many thoughts were going through her head at that time. the Schneeras not even noticing when the dead forest of trees changed into a narrow path, which led deep into a cliff face before opening out into the town of Daggerhorn. "We're here." That was all the warning they got. Everyone aside from their leader snapping out of their thoughts to view the destruction ahead. The charred remains of houses littered the area. Walls of blackened stone, a testament to that horrible night years ago. Snow half buried the skeletal remains of the town, but it wasn't too hard to imagine what Daggerhorn looked like in its prime. Weiss could just see it. A small, bustling town of people with a smithy to the right and a bakery to the left. Down the cobblestone road there would be a school somewhere. Some farmers' homes also. Somewhere in between the crowd of adults, Weiss imagined 3-year-old Ruby running through the streets, laughing as her friends chased after her. God, Weiss didn't want to be here anymore. "Ruby," Yang's voice came out in a whisper. The blonde just as horrified and stunned as the rest of them. This was so unlike Ruby's older sister. Weiss deeply wishing from the normalcy they had back at Beacon. Oh my gosh. Blake seemed of two minds, biting her lip as she fought silently with herself, to say something or not. Weiss knew everyone was asking themselves the same question. But what would you say in a situation like this? Sorry just didn't seem to cut it. "It's not far," Ruby said, in a hollow, empty-sounding voice. Weiss cringed at that voice, wanting to scream at the red-cloaked girl. That was not how she was supposed to be. Ruby was supposed to be childish. She was supposed to be dim-witted and hyperactive. And don't even get Weiss started on her fighting style. Anything but this. Ruby was supposed to be everything else but this. "What's not far?" Blake questioned, her voice hesitant. Ruby looked back over her shoulder, but didn't really look at them. "You'll see." "I'm home." Weiss couldn't breathe. Like the rest of them, she had followed after Ruby quietly, all the while looking out for Beowulf activity. So far, there was none, and that didn't sit very well with the Hundreds-to-be. But then Ruby came to a stop and spoke. Suddenly, Weiss found all thoughts of the Grim gone. Ruby stood in front of a charred house, one of many which occupied the area. This particular house looked to be in better shape than the rest of them. Only half of its roof missing, with only the front and right wall knocked out. Personal belongings lay scattered in disarray inside, half buried in snow. There was a broken wooden chair lying on the ground next to an overturned table. Broken dishes and warped cutlery circled them on the ground. Further in, the remains of a couch was seen, in some places ripped with 3 slashes, identical to the scar Weiss found on Ruby's stomach. Towards the back of the half-ruined house, Weiss made out beds. There was a larger one which she assumed to have originally belonged to Ruby's parents or some other relative, and the other, a smaller one, had to have been Ruby's. Ruby walked inside without saying anything further, passing the splintered front door and all of the broken furniture. She stood in front of the small bed. Yang was quick to follow after her, Blake glancing back at Weiss before she too followed the 2 girls inside. As Weiss stepped forward after them, her boot hit something in the snow, stooping down to uncover the item. A shaky gasp escaped her lips when she lifted the said item up from the white cold. Man, there's something that I have to say. I have really chapped lips. And also, I don't think I should have recorded that when I did my scream singing earlier. My voice is still kind of recovering from that. It was a small teddy bear, one arm missing. Most likely had been burnt off during the massacre that night. The teddy bear wore a tattered, half-scorched red cloak. Droplets of water, tears splashed the ground at Weiss's feet. The Schneer is bringing up her free hand to her mouth to stop the sobs from escaping her throat. Oh, fuck. Weiss. The Schnee heiress flinched at the sound of her name, quickly snapping out of her thoughts. After briefly visiting her family's ruined home, Ruby led the team a bit farther into Daggerhorn, to a cliff edge at the back of the town where a stone monument sat in the snow, Emerald-colored eyes looked at Weiss in concern. What is it, Blake? The sword wielder answered. Ruby stood in front of the stone monument, Yang there with her, hugging her from behind. For the past few minutes, the blonde had been quietly murmuring things, Weiss assuming them to be reassurances to her little sister, given all they had already seen today. Weiss had been standing off to the side, at the edge of the cliff face to the right, staring down at the dead forest below them in the meantime. Ruby is calling for you, the dark-haired girl said quietly. Weiss hesitantly looked at Ruby before sighing. She nodded solemnly. Seconds later, walking past the other girl. By the time she stopped next to the pair of unconventional sisters, the murmuring stopped. Yang glanced at her with teary eyes. Weiss swallowed, uncomfortable in the silence. Blake stood mute to her right. Weiss, Ruby said in a soft voice, making Weiss jump slightly. I'd like to introduce you to my grandma. Blank silver eyes met Weiss's blue ones, the small smile on Ruby's lips making the white-haired girl numb. Grandma, this is Weiss, Ruby continued, looking back at the stone monument. My other teammate from Beacon. The four of us make up Team RWBY. Weiss slowly turned to face the stone monument, this being the first time that she really looked at it up close. Summer rose, thus kindly I scatter. I remember this being like one of the biggest mysteries. Is she her mother? Is she her grandmother? Well, people assume different things, but I mean, we all should have known that it was her mother. It's a pleasure to meet you, Weiss said, staring at the words carved into the stone. Her voice was tight, the schniera stiff. The quartet stood in silence, neither Yang, Blake, nor Weiss feeling it appropriate to say anything further. Ruby, on the other hand, chose to remain quiet. It was only the unsheathing of Gamel's shroud which shattered the moment. Just as Weiss's head snapped towards her bow-wearing teammate, multiple howls sounded in the distance. Burn Naster was drawn in an instant, Yang's Emercelica also switching to active mode at the same time. This was a trap, Blake said, her voice strained. In the dead forest below them, dozens of beowulfs darted through the trees. They were coming for them. There was only one way down from this cliff face, a winding path behind them which led back to the Daggerhorn, which led to the forest of dead trees, and the Grim would soon be blocking it. They were hunting us from the very beginning, Blake continued, her hammer-colored eyes sizing up their opponents. Well, this is just great, Yang snarled, the blonde quickly wiping away her tears with the back of her hand. I know. Three heads snapped towards Ruby. What? Weiss dared to ask. Blue eyes quickly locked onto the hand clutching at the shirt above Ruby's stomach. Weiss's eyes widened. Ruby? I've been waiting for them. Crescent rose unfolded in a world of motion. A strong gust of wind shot by the group a split second later, pulling off Ruby's hood. Silver-colored eyes looked calmly down at the pack of Grim below. Team RWBY, the red-cloaked girl said. Weiss shivered when those silver-colored eyes passed over her. Those were not Ruby's eyes. They were so empty. She didn't know this person standing next to her. It's time to do what we came here to do, Ruby said. A pause. Cut them down. Ruby leapt off of the cliff face, ignoring the cries of her teammates. Ruby! Sis! Weiss cursed silently herself, the first of the three to leap after their AWOL leader. She should have known. She should have known Ruby was not going to take this well, in spite of how calm she originally appeared. A glyph of white dust appeared under her feet, Weiss using it to slow her descent down the wall of rock. She couldn't but laugh to herself at how similar this feeling was to the day of their initiation. It was almost exactly the same, save for the fact they were not in the Emerald Forest. Nor was this a controlled environment. Any mistake here would be fatal. As another glyph of white appeared under her feet, Weiss spied Ruby already groundside and engaging Beowulfs. That idiot had jumped straight into the middle of them. While to some degree that made Weiss feel a bit better, as that was a very RWBY thing to do, she couldn't stop that horrible feeling in the pit of her stomach from spreading. The feeling that something awful was about to happen. Fuck. Mom? Weiss's head whipped around. What did you just say? The start of the battle was hectic. Beowulfs were as far as they could see. A mass of black completely covering over the snowy white ground under their feet. Confined to the dead forest of black trees, their only saving grace was those same trees. Trees which limited the movements of the Beowulfs because of how many of them were around. That and the total lack of unity within the massive Grimm. It took them a few moments of mad scramble, but Team RWBY eventually found the rhythm. RWBY and Yang led the charge, with Blake and Weiss pulling up the rear, covering the other girls as open sides. Every so often they would switch, Blake and Weiss taking up front, with Yang and RWBY covering their back. Just when the end was seemingly in sight, the numbers of Grimm cut down to half. An eerie howl sounded above the grunts and roar, silencing them all. What in bacon is that? It was huge. Triple the height of a regular Beowulf, and just as ugly. This new Grimm was Beowulf in shape, but its fur was white instead of black, and its mask black and blue instead of white and red. Then there were its eyes. Its eyes were dark silver, a shade darker than RWBY's. Mom? RWBY repeated, frozen in her spot. Is that you? The lesser Beowulfs made way for this new one. One Weiss assumed to be the alpha of the pack. That was the only logical explanation she had for its sheer size and the reaction of the other Grimm to it. Either that, or it was some sort of mutation or deviation within the Grimm, both ideas making Weiss shiver. Mom, it's RWBY. The alpha Beowulf slowly crept towards the red-cloaked girl. The rest of the lesser Beowulfs content with remaining in their spots in a circle around Team RWBY. Not one of them dared to make a sound as the alpha Beowulf advanced. Yang stared wide-eyed at the monstrosity, Blake doing the same. It took almost a minute for Weiss to notice that. In that time, the alpha Beowulf having closed the distance between RWBY and itself. The red-cloaked girl raised up her hands, like a child expected to be lifted into their parents' arms. Tears rolled down her cheeks. Mom, RWBY said, a brilliant smile on her face. I missed you so much. Snapping herself out of her stupor, Weiss leaned forward to run to her obviously stupefied teen leader's aid. RWBY! Dark silver eyes connected with hers, not RWBY's, and suddenly Weiss couldn't move. She couldn't even finish her warning. Limbs trembled as she fought to make her legs move. Weiss's breaths coming out in harsh pants. An overwhelming sense of panic and fear gripped Weiss, making it hard to focus much on anything. Blue eyes darted right and left fearfully. The Schneer is quickly realizing that she wasn't the only one in this predicament. Yang and Blake also seemed to be suffering from the same affliction. The other two shaking as they fought against their own paralysis. Mom, RWBY sniffled, the alpha Beowulf just out of hand's reach. The alpha Beowulf drew its gaze from Weiss and the rest of the team to focus solely on the small girl in front of it. Just as it drew back a paw with sharp claws, a scream tore through Weiss's throat. RWBY! Fuck, son! Oh my god. Oh man, I feel like I did better with the whole, like, dark tone. Sorry, I was trying to take a drink of water before saying anything else. Oh my god. Jesus. Alright. That was chapter 5, you guys. Let's do chapter 6 now. Alright. Chapter 6. Bleeding Heart. Oh god. Oh, Jesus. Move. Mom, RWBY sniffled, raising her arms up towards the alpha Beowulf just out of arm's reach. Move. The alpha Beowulf drew its gaze from the other girls of Team RWBY to focus solely on the red-cloaked girl in front of it. Move! Claws as sharp as swords and just as big pulled back before the alpha Beowulf slashed downwards viciously. RWBY! Weiss didn't know how it happened, but she moved. Just as she lurched forward in the snow, a glyph of white dust materialized under her feet, the Schneer instantly becoming a blur of motion. Weiss shot towards RWBY like a bullet. A split second before the alpha Beowulf covered itself with RWBY's blood. Well, just before... a split second before the alpha Beowulf could cover itself with RWBY's blood. Weiss tackled the red-cloaked girl to the snowy ground below. I mean, obviously there's going to be some grammatical issues and sometimes some typos, but... oh, man, sometimes it gets to me. I'm sorry. Sometimes I would correct it. As you guys notice, if you guys actually read along with the fanfic as I'm reading it, you would know that sometimes I would reword things just to correct it a bit. This one, I can't. But I have a feeling that's supposed to be before the Beowulf could actually hit her or anything. Before it could actually cover itself in RWBY's blood by attacking her. The pair hit the ground with a jarring thump, the air rushing from her lungs so fast it left Weiss dizzy. White claws missed them both by an inch. Moaned the girl underneath Weiss. What was that? RWBY blinked. Weiss? Thank God, Weiss said breathlessly in relief. I wasn't sure I was going to make it, she admitted, her voice shaking. White-knuckled fists clenched tightly at RWBY's cloak. Watch out! The alpha Beowulf reared up on its hind legs, roaring in rage. Weiss pushed up for RWBY to look back over her shoulder, her blue eyes widening in horror as the monster now stood even taller than before. Dark silver eyes locked gazes with her again, Weiss finding herself frozen in her spot, barely breathing. Vernaster trembled in her grasp, in the snow next to RWBY. Weiss unable to lift her hand no matter how much she willed it to. The alpha Beowulf narrowed its eyes at her, lurching forward with jaws wide. Oh god, nope, there goes my allergies again. My dog just came into the room. Dog, why? Whatever. Mom, no! RWBY exclaimed. She's my friend! There was a blur of red into Weiss's horror. RWBY darted in front of her, between Weiss and the charging alpha Beowulf, her arms wide. RWBY! For a split second, the alpha Beowulf paused at RWBY's shout. Then a blast of red exploded in its face, and it lurched backwards away from them. RWBY! The gang exclaimed again, rushing towards the pair. Whoever had paralyzed the blonde before seemed to have worn off now. Blake followed behind her quickly with Crescent Rose in her arms. Are you alright? Yang hugged her sister tightly before pulling back to give her a once-over. Blake held out Crescent Rose to RWBY, the red-cloaked girl taking it from her without thinking. Yang, I was so worried, the blonde said, overriding anything RWBY had to say. If she hadn't, can you stand? Weiss looked up into the concerned amber gaze of Blake. The black-haired girl held out her hand. Weiss looked down her legs. I think so, she said wearily, taking Blake's offered assistance. Feeling was slowly coming back to her limbs now that the alpha Beowulf had been distracted. For the moment, at least. Weiss's hand still shook, and not because of the cold. Another roar sounded, everyone turning towards the alpha Beowulf again. It had since recovered from Yang's gauntlet blast to the face and was now glowering at them. The alpha Beowulf was angry, very angry. Hateful dark silver eyes, now almost black, glared at the quartet. Another twisted howl erupted from its lips. Mom, RWBY sharply inhaled when the alpha Beowulf locked eyes with her, doubling over, clutching at her stomach. A strangled cry escaped her throat, silver eyes wide with agony. RWBY! Yang shouted. RWBY collapsed backwards into her sister's arms, like dead weight. RWBY! RWBY! The blonde repeated over and over again, shaking the lip form of her younger sibling. Weiss was breathing hard and fast, her fingers going wider than before as she gripped Marinaster tighter. It was happening all over again. We have to get out of here, Blake said. Camel shroud raised as a cacophony of howls surround. Oh my god. A cacophony of howls sounded all around them. It wouldn't be long before the lesser Beowulfs joined into the frame. RWBY! Yang screamed again, distraught. Biting her lip, Weiss's gaze darted back and forth around the area. The alpha Beowulf was pacing side to side, keeping its distance, as if waiting for them to make the next move. There was no doubt in Weiss's mind that the moment they did, so too would the lesser Beowulfs. "We need an exit," Weiss said to Blake, knowing full well their blonde teammate was too distracted with her teammate to be much help right now. Nodding her head to the left, Blake's gaze followed Weiss's, the black-haired girl also nodding. To the left, the ring of Beowulfs surrounding them were not as thick as the other places. That would be the key to their escape. They had only one chance at this, but if they timed things right, they would be long gone before the Beowulfs realized what had happened. Weiss walked forward a few steps, placing herself between the rest of the team and the alpha Beowulf. "Weiss?" Yang questioned, the white-haired girl's shadow covering both her and her sister. Weiss looked back over her shoulder. "We're retreating," the Shnee's successor said. "I'm leaving RWBY to you." Focusing her attention on Marinasser for a moment, Weiss didn't look up again until the revolving chamber on her weapon clicked into place on the red dust cartridge. Pulling up the weapon in front of her, perpendicular to the ground, blue eyes locked onto their target. Marinasser's blade glowed red. "On my mark," Weiss told Blake. The black-haired girl lowered her stance out of Weiss's line of sight. "1." Blake unraveled the ribbon on Gamel's shroud. 2. Yang held her sister tighter in her arms. "Now!" Marinasser slashed horizontally out to the left, a wave of red tearing through the air and straight through the weakest point of the Beowulf ring around them. The lesser Beowulfs hit with the attack and immediately went up in flames, soon after being sliced into pieces by Gamel's shroud. Blake wasted no time in making use of her weapon's range. The bow-tying girl yanking back on the black ribbon attached to her weapon, cutting through more lesser Beowulfs. The alpha Beowulf roared. The remaining lesser Beowulfs spurred into action by their leader's rage. Weiss was already moving by the time the first of the lesser Beowulfs reached her. Marinasser glowing yellow as she deftly leapt over the swiping arm of the lesser Beowulf. Yang gritted her teeth when 3 lesser Beowulfs charged at her head-on, but then a light blue dust glyph appeared in front of her and sent the lesser Beowulfs rebounding away with double the force they charged in with. Bullets tore through the air, Blake doing an aerial flip upward as 5 lesser Beowulfs were left at her. Poof. Oh my god. Jesus, really? Boom, boom, boom. 3 lesser Beowulfs were shot down in midair. Blake catching sight of her partner firing at the remaining 2 with her right gauntlet. RWBY was held gently against Yang by the blonde's left arm. The black-haired girl smiled as Gamel's shroud lashed out again. Blake pulling and twisting her black ribbon in various directions to cut down the remaining lesser Beowulfs blocking their path. Her feet hit the snow a second later, followed by the thumping of dismembered body parts. Their path was now clear. "Go!" Weiss shouted, her right hand swishing through the air in a specific pattern. Glyphs of white dust lit up the snow, in a line from the team's current position, straight through the break in the Beowulf line and into the dead forest. "Weiss!" Yang began. "Now!" the Schnee heiress exclaimed, ducking under the swiping arm of a lesser Beowulf. Yang frowned, taking one look at the white-haired girl before zipping down the line of white dust glyphs. Empowered by dust, Yang's regular speed was quadrupled, and the blonde with RWBY in her arms disappeared in a blur of motion. A charging lesser Beowulf narrowed in on Weiss from the right, the white-haired girl huffing as she turned to face it. She was out of strength, having used so much dust in such a short span of time. Fatigue was setting in quickly. Sweat drizzled her brow in spite of how cold it was. Weiss quickly pulled at the neck of her cloak for relief, the material now starting to choke her. Just as she raised Marinasser to defend herself against the incoming lesser Beowulf, it met its demise through a bullet to the eye. Weiss looked over her shoulder and found Blake, the black-haired girl, waiting for her near the first of the white dust cliffs. "Come on!" Blake exclaimed, dispatching another Beowulf which came near. Weiss didn't need to be told twice. She shook off using the last of her reserved energy. She shook off, but took off using the last of her reserved energy. Straight towards the glyphs of white dust. Once Blake was confident Weiss was right behind her, the bow-wearing girl took off down a line of dust glyphs in a blur. Now that her teammates were clear, Weiss spun around, skidding to a halt just before hitting the first white dust glyph. All the lesser Beowulfs remaining charged at her, Weiss's gaze not on them but the alpha Beowulf behind the scenes, watching. Dark silver eyes glared at her, promising a horrible, painful death. Turning her attention back to the charging lesser Beowulfs, a glowing light blue Myrtanaster was jabbed into the ground blade first, ice crystallizing outwards from Weiss's blade with increasing speed. The lesser Beowulfs that were too close to stop in time were skewered on the jagged edges of ice reaching skyward, while the rest of them smashed head first into the ice wall now blocking their path. The wall of ice creaked and cracked under their assault, but held, for the moment. Stumbling to the side after pulling Myrtanaster from the ground, Weiss weakly trotted over to the white dust glyph she cast, and it disappeared in a blur down the line. A whimper. Shh, Ruby, it's all right. You're safe. Shh. Weiss's head pounded, the white-haired girl feeling utterly exhausted. That and a bit nauseous. There was no doubt in her mind she'd overdone it in that last move. Overdone it wasn't quite right. She stupidly panicked and was now paying the price. Weiss had used up her entire cartridge of light blue dust in making the ice wall. Looking back on it now, even she would agree that was a bit excessive, but what was done, and she couldn't change things now, even if she wanted to. Another whimper, followed by a mewl. I'm here, Ruby, I'm here. Blue eyes tiredly examined the forms at the back of the cave. After running for the better part of who knows how long, Team RWBY happened upon an obscured cave in the cliff wall near Daggerhorn. While it wasn't the most homiest of places, it put a roof over their heads and kept them out of the biting wind which started up just after their speedy escape. Blake managed to get a fire going, finding dry firewood who knows where. Yang stuck close to RWBY, the younger girl mewling restlessly, still unconscious. Yang's cloak was draped over her, the blonde hoping it would keep her younger sibling warmer at least. She really couldn't do much else. Hold up a moment, I need some water. Jesus. For a while after the fight, the team remained quiet, with the exception of Ruby's murmurs. Just when Weiss was about to nod off for some much needed rest, a luxury none of them could really afford right now because of the crazy pack of Beowulfs out there, it would be Blake who spoke up. Someone mind explaining what that thing was back there? Weiss looked at Blake. I'd like to know myself, Yang said, her voice low. When RWBY mewled again, Yang's gaze quickly went back to her sister. The Shneera sighed, rubbing her eyes. I think we all want to know what that thing was back there. Well, no. I think we all know what that thing was back there. Violet-colored eyes were on Weiss in an instant. And just what the hell is that supposed to mean? You have eyes and ears, don't you? Weiss snapped irritably. Her head was really pounding. That thing is obviously the pack leader, an alpha of sorts. And maybe Ruby's mother, but Weiss didn't say that out loud. Weiss scowled to herself at that thought. Really? That had to be the most preposterous thing she had ever thought of. She must have been more tired than she thought if that's what she was thinking. But still, with the way RWBY was reacting to it, Weiss was having doubts. Shit. Silence. Mom, RWBY quietly whined. Ruby, Yang said. Hey. She rubbed her sister's hand, the one clutching at her stomach through her cloak. It's okay. You're safe. You're just wasting your time, Weiss said, looking over at the younger girl. That's not going to work. She needs to sleep that off. The first thing they did upon securing this location was to check on RWBY. At least that's what Yang did. And after visually checking her over for half an hour and finding no physical injury, the blonde resorted to consoling her distraught sister the best way she could, through gentle words and holding her hand. But some injuries were not physical, and Weiss knew that all too well. Yeah, Yang challenged, bristling visibly. And what the hell would you know? Ice blue eyes glared at Yang. They were all on edge, tired and cold. Snapping at each other would get them nowhere. Weiss knew that. But still, the Schneears was in no mood to deal with the cranky blonde. It's called phantom pain, you dolt, Weiss exclaimed, breathing heavily. It took her a moment to push down the anger rising inside of her. The white-haired girl knew Yang hadn't meant any hostility towards her. Not really. The mind may have forgotten, but the body never forgets. Weiss sighed, looking away. Yang knew Weiss was telling the truth. Weiss seeing it in the blonde's eyes. But Yang was scared and worried and needed to vent. Unfortunately, Weiss had made herself a target just by speaking, as the both of them were still not on the best of terms. While over time things had improved between them, it still wasn't ideal. What would you know of it? Yang said gruffly. Blake shot the blonde a disapproving look. Weiss sighed again, closing her eyes. Seems like she just have to be the mature one between the both of them right now. I know, Weiss said, tracing a finger along the scar over her left eye. Because it happens to me too. Violet-colored eyes widened in shock. Yang absolutely speechless. Blake also looked at Weiss in surprise. This had to be the first time Weiss had voluntarily opened herself up to them, showing them something else aside from disdain and annoyance. Blue eyes opened partially, Weiss staring at her hands. When I was younger, Weiss began, I was in an accident. Weiss didn't know why she was telling them these things. She had never revealed that to anyone. Perhaps it was because she was tired, oh so tired, and didn't care what they thought of her right now. And being as tired as she was right now, any restraint she normally had just wasn't there. Or perhaps she just needed to talk to someone about this, having had no one else all these years. Ruby's scars, seeing this town, it stirred things up in ways that she had thought had been long forgotten. She was supposed to be over this, having dealt with the pain years ago, but apparently she hadn't. For as she continued to speak, the pain felt as fresh as it had years ago. I must have been 5 or 6 at the time, Weiss continued. Mother had just come to get me for my most recent recital. A haunted smile. My teacher couldn't stop raving about my voice. He kept rambling on and on about how I should be enrolled in advanced singing lessons because I was a natural at it. Normally, Yang would have snorted right about now, but the blonde still remained quiet. Weiss clenched her fist as the memory came to the forefront of her mind. The sights, the sounds, even the smells. All of it. As Weiss sat on the cold, hard ground, in her mind, she wasn't really here. No. She was back in the car over 10 years ago, with her mother sitting next to her, not Blake. On the way home, a truck driver on nightly delivery fell asleep at the wheel. Weiss swallowed thickly, her eyes growing misty. Blake tensed beside her. Funny enough, the driver worked for my father at the Schneedust Company. A hollow laugh. Yang cringed at it, but Weiss didn't care. I suppose that didn't really matter in the end, Weiss said bitterly. She blinked a few times to disperse the tears gathering in her eyes. His truck quickly jumped the center median and hit us dead on. Weiss heard it, the sound of crunching metal, her mother screaming, the sound of glass breaking, and then there was pain. Clutching her fist at her side, she took a deep breath and blinked. She was back in the cave now, Yang and Blake deathly silent next to her. I was the only survivor, Weiss said, feigning as much calm and control as she could. She wiped away a stray tear from her eyes. This, Schneears continued, running a finger down her scar over her left eye yet again, came from that accident. Blue Eyes looked at Yang, noting the crestfallen look on the blonde's face. Blake seemed rather morose as well. And every year, right around the time the accident happened, I feel it. A breath. Whether I want to or not. Yang looked away. So yes, I know something about that, Weiss said hotly. Weiss, the blonde began, turning back to her teammate. Save it, Weiss said, rising stiffly to her feet. Her legs were starting to go numb with all of this sitting. I don't need your pity. Weiss turned her back on her team members and walked to the mouth of the cave. She stared outside. All she saw was white. Ruby will be fine if you give her a chance to rest a bit, Weiss said. The pain always goes away after a while. But does it really? Yang asked quietly. Weiss looked back over her shoulder, finding Yang looking down on a restless Ruby Rose next to her. Of course it does, moron, Weiss snapped, though her normal bite wasn't there. Ruby has you now, doesn't she? But what about you? Blake dared to ask. Weiss turned to face forward again. Blake would not get an answer. Alright. Oh my god, that was chapter 6. Fuck. It's just... I think either that chapter or actually chapter 5 maybe. Actually maybe like chapter 3 or somewhere around that realm. I actually started writing. I remember thinking about this story as it progressed. Maybe partway through one of the stories that I wrote called Death from Above. Though I have to say I was very shitty of a writer at the time, to be honest, compared to now. I always wish that I could convey something like this. More like a sort of like heart-wrenching moment or heartbreaking moment. The way that this story does. And goddamn, this story still holds up. Actually, it would hold up. I'm not gonna get into what I already did in the burned out video that I did. I think how I did that video was I kept talking about how fanfiction has just gone from some very unique stories to just being John. Because apparently everyone has a boner for John. So, you don't really see stories like these. Or, if you do, it isn't getting the exposure that it deserves. To be honest, there's so many stories out there, and I keep saying this. There's so many stories out there that deserve a hell of a lot more exposure than some of the ones that are super popular right now. It's just fucking sad. Anyways, sorry about that. I got a bit bitter there. Chapter 7. Rest now. Your fight is over. Weiss woke with a jerk. Her limbs were stiff. Her head felt heavy. And above all else, she was cold. Waking up in an unfamiliar place, combined with the disorientation of being snapped awake before she was fully rested, quickly had Weiss panicking. Oh god, there goes my nose again. Where was she? How did she get here? What was... Hey. Weiss blinked. Blake? The Schnee-Eris rubbed her eyes. Looking at her surroundings again, she found herself in a cave. The campfire in the center almost burned out. That's right. They were still on a mission. Can you stand? Weiss pushed herself up to the sitting position, biting her lip to hold back a groan. Yeah, she replied, lethargically getting to her feet. A hand on her arm helped pull her up. I can get up on my own, you know, Weiss irritably. I know, Blake answered her, not the least bit bothered by the heiress's snappiness. If Weiss hadn't been feeling as miserable as she did right now, she would have realized something important. Well, not really, as in world-shattering important, but rather important to her had she been her regular self. Weiss had been napping on Blake's lap. When she nodded off earlier, Weiss had been sitting up, her back resting against the cold cave wall. Later, she'd realized this fact, but by then, Blake had forgotten the whole thing. Yang, however, didn't, and she would rib at Weiss for many days to come about it afterwards. RWBY and Yang? Came the question. When the white-haired girl realized it was only the two of them. Weiss rubbed the stiff muscles in the back of her neck. The sword wielder wincing when cold hands came in contact with warm skin. She shivered. The Schneeress quickly brought her hands up to her mouth and tried to warm them with her own breath. Outside, Blake said, now standing herself and straightening out her cloak. Beowulfs were spotted not too far from here. We were going to find another rest spot before they cornered us. Weiss's brows furrowed, her eyes narrowing. The look on the alpha Beowulf's face before the temporary escape flashed to her mind instantly. How long was I asleep? Weiss questioned, pattering out of the cave. Blake walked alongside her. A few hours or so. Blue eyes went skyward, looking for the sun. It was hard to tell exactly how much time had passed since they were dropped off and the mission began. It was still relatively bright outside, but that could have been all due to the snow around, reflecting the light back up. Two figures slowly came into focus as they continued to walk. One red, the other yellow. Did you sleep at all? Blake didn't respond right away. A few minutes, she said, once she did. Weiss nodded unconsciously at Blake, her gaze still on the two people ahead of them. Had she actually glanced at her companion, she would have seen surprise in those amber-colored eyes. That was the first time the Ice Princess had shown open concern for her other teammate. RWBY, Yang said in exasperation. She nodded in acknowledgement when Weiss and Blake joined them. Just moments ago, while on a quick patrol, he had spotted a pair of lesser Beowulfs hunting together. Rather than engage them like she normally would have, she opted to head back to base camp and warn the rest of the team. That thing is not your mother. Weiss looked at RWBY, silently giving the girl a once-over. Like herself, RWBY looked exhausted. Her hair was disheveled. The beginnings of bags were forming under her eyes, and normally pale skin was a bit whiter. But she was up and still breathing. Weiss took that to be a good sign. Running a hand through her unruly hair, Yang continued. It's grim. It's a nasty one at that. You saw what it did. It damn near killed you, semi-petrifying the rest of us from interfering. What kind of mother does that to her daughter and her friends? Friends, huh? Weiss glanced at Blake next to her, the bow-wearing girl also watching the conversation between the two sisters. For a moment, the black-haired girl locked eyes with the sword wielder, quickly turning back to RWBY and Yang when RWBY started to speak. I know it's hard to believe, Yang, RWBY said. She gave her sister a small smile. But I know it's her. Yeah, my lips are really chapped. RWBY, stop, Yang said in frustration. She clenched a fist. That thing tried to kill you. All of us. If it once was your mother, it certainly isn't anymore. RWBY's gaze dropped to her feet. Yang sighed, pulling her sister into a hug. Look, she said, stroking RWBY's hair gently. I know it's not easy, but this is the thing we came here to kill, to stop it from killing others. We came here to prevent what happened to you from happening to anyone else. I know, but RWBY bit her lip, tears on the verge of falling. Weiss couldn't take it anymore. RWBY, the red-cloaked girl flinched. Weiss? Violet-colored eyes narrowed at Weiss in warning. The Schneeheiress ignored them. Look, RWBY, Weiss began. She paused a moment to order her thoughts. I know we haven't been the best of friends since starting at Beacon, Yang snorted. Blue eyes glared at the blonde, Weiss's eyes softening when she turned back to RWBY. I know this isn't easy to deal with right now. Trust me, I know. But this has to be done. This has to come to an end. And only you can end it. I know, Weiss, I know, RWBY said, her gaze going downwards again. Weiss chewed on the inside of her cheek, fighting back the urge to hug the downtrodden Ruby Rose. It's just that... Taking a deep breath, Weiss took one step forward and put a hand on the younger girl's shoulder. Isn't it about time you forgave yourself for what happened long ago and set your mother free? Silver eyes widened and teared before RWBY broke down in sobs. Yang held her sister tighter as the younger girl curled in towards her, a look of concern crossing her face. She looked back at the Schneeheiress in shock. Blake also shared a look of surprise. Weiss smiled sadly, rubbing RWBY shuddering back. You're really lucky, you know, she said softly. RWBY probably couldn't even hear her right now, but it didn't matter. Not everyone gets the chance to set things right in the end. Yang looked away, frowning. Unknown to the white-haired girl, RWBY's older sister was thinking about just how much she had misjudged the girl named Weiss Schnee. Weiss yelped as she tumbled backwards into the snow. She had just barely dodged a leaping lesser Beowulf, but while she cleared its shearing claws without issue, the same could not be said for her cloak. After a few more hours of rest, Team RWBY went back to the forest of dead trees to make their final stand. Any and all lesser Beowulfs which crossed their paths on the way were eliminated with quick and cold efficiency. Team RWBY didn't have time to play nice. They were exhausted, mentally and physically, and the biting cold just made things worse. If they didn't finish their mission now, that was it. No second chances. They either fought and died or fought and lived. That was the life of a huntress. Weiss was starting to wonder if she had made a mistake. With the lesser Beowulf dragging down her cloak with its claws, Weiss was literally yanked off of her feet by the neck. Coughing violently after nearly being choked, the sound of material tearing was her only warning before the lesser Beowulf pounced on her again. A line of fire blasted through the snow. Weiss huffing with dizziness and exertion as she entangled herself from her cloak and stumbled backwards a few steps. Sweat drizzled down her brow, the Schneeheiress immediately shivering when a cold breeze swept through the area. It was freezing now without her cloak, more so than before. But she could live without it for a few minutes. She'd rather lose her cloak than her head after all. The lesser Beowulf yowled in agony, now completely in flames. It writhed on the ground, with one quick slash of Myrnaster and went still, for good. A light blue dust glyph appeared under her feet, while shooting upwards into the air, evading the sweeping limb of another lesser Beowulf in the process. They'd been fighting for the better part of 15 minutes now, Yang, Blake, and herself taking on the smaller, more numerous lesser Beowulfs, while RWBY faced the alpha Beowulf. While the teams seemed to be making headway into the Grimm's numbers, this fight was far from over. Weiss was almost out of red dust. I'm yawning now. Shit. Her other cartridges nearly empty as well. While she carried extra cartridges of dust in her side pouch, she simply didn't have time to reload her weapon in all this mess. It amazed the white-haired girl just how fast she'd gone through her dust. She reloaded Myrnaster before coming here. Yang seemed to be holding her own, the blonde's cloak sporting a few tears here and there. Yang's arms also had a few red scratches. But she was more or less in good shape. Blake was completely unscathed, the black-haired girl as fast as a ninja and just as deadly. But even she was showing signs of tiring, her movement starting to slow down. Out of them all, RWBY was the one struggling the most. Without a doubt, the leader of Team RWBY was still fighting with her inner demons and hence her lackluster performance. But there was nothing Weiss could do to help her with that. She couldn't interfere. This was RWBY's fight and her fight alone. All the rest of them could do was cover her back. Then RWBY went flying backwards into the snow, making Weiss reconsider her original idea of not interfering. Well, not interfering. RWBY! Yang and Blake's heads whipped towards RWBY at Weiss's shout. The Schneeress was already in motion, zipping towards their down leader. Weiss bit her lip as her feet touched down on the snow again, a line of white dust clouds shooting out from in front of her and directly in line with the Alpha Beowulf. Turning the revolving chamber of Myrnaster, red dust clicked into place once again. Weiss's foot is connecting with the first of her dust cliffs. She shot forward like a rocket. Her already insanely fast speed tripled from the dust boost. Everything became a blur. Weiss's vision narrowing down to one thing. Not this time. She was not going to lose another person. Not this time. A scream erupted from Weiss's lips as Myrnaster swung forward, an arc of red tearing through the air in front of her. The Alpha Beowulf shrieked as the claws on its left hand were sliced off, its right paw separated from its arm. Weiss appeared in the blur of white directly between RWBY and the Alpha Beowulf, ice blue eyes glaring at the monstrosity. Myrnaster already in motion for round 2. Weiss would make it pay. She would make it hurt. She would make it suffer. Weiss Schnee, heiress to the Schnee Dust Company and wielder of Myrnaster, was going to make it regret ever crossing them and her. Bing! Weiss's blade met the bone mask of the Alpha Beowulf's head and stopped dead. Myrnaster's red dust cartridge was empty. Blue eyes whined as the dark silver ones locked onto them. Spots of white exploded across Weiss's vision as something hard slanted to the heiress's side and sent her rocketing through the air. For a brief moment, she was weightless. Crack. And then all she knew was pain. Weiss's gasp of breath was an agonizing scream. Weiss! Weiss was on her knees. Myrnaster held tightly in her left shaking hand, blade down in the snow. It was the only thing keeping her body upright right now. Her right hand clenched at her ribs, all of them broken in her impact with a nearby tree. Sounds distorted around her into an undecipherable haze. Every rasping breath she took igniting spasms of pain in her entire torso. A cough racked her battered frame. Droplets of red staining the snow in front of her as a line of red rolled down her chin. Gods, it hurts so much to breathe right now. A muffled yell forced Weiss's eyes open. The Schneer is just barely able to lift her head to look up. Her vision was blurry. Weiss dazedly staring at what appeared to be a blob of white with a spot of black coming at her. 3 of them. As the blobs came closer, she was barely able to discern its shape. Somewhere at the back of her mind, Weiss realized it was the Alpha Beowulf barreling down at her. Blue eyes squinted. The Schneer is coughing again. When had 2 more Alpha Beowulfs just joined the fray? A whimper escaped her lips as Weiss tried to stand to no avail. Any movement multiplied the pain in her already broken body. Weiss nearly blacking out just trying to sit up straighter. Pain or not, in the hazy reaches of her mind, she knew she had to move. She was a sitting duck. Pretty much literally right now. With 3 Alpha Beowulfs rushing at her, if she didn't move and soon, she would be dead. But her body refused to cooperate. And she was so very tired. Darkness crept around the edges of her vision. It was calling her, telling her to close her eyes and give in. That awful pain in her body soon became numb, disjointed from her senses, a warmth wrapping around her in its places. Was this what it felt like to be dying? Blue eyes slowly drooped shut, the grip on Myrnaster slackening. That yell again. Blue eyes snapped open. A groan sounding from her throat as she jerked into awareness. The darkness around her vision receded slightly but was still there, threatening to engulf her whole. The 3 Alpha Beowulfs were nearly upon her now, this time being chased by 3 rubies. Weiss could barely comprehend how that was possible in her weakened state, things being all jumbled up together. No matter. The fingers of Weiss's right hand pulled at the flap holding her side pouch closed. Weiss biting her lip. Pain racked her frame with every movement, muscles straining because of her injuries. Weiss fought to ignore it. She needed to give the rubies more time. There was no way Murnaster was going to be of any help to her now, aside from keeping her upright. She didn't know of one explosive way to buy some time, however. Just as the 3 alpha beowulfs pounced on her, an open vial of yellow dust, though in Weiss's case 3 vials, went hurling through the air at the faces of the beasts. Grimm swiped at the vials on instinct. And the moment their paws came into contact with them, shattering glass, an explosion of lightning erupted between them and sent Weiss tumbling through the air again. She landed in the snow seconds later, on her back. Murnaster lost. Hooded blue eyes stared up at the sky. A light snow is sprinkling the area. Weiss felt nothing. Her hands, her feet, her body. Even the cold underneath her, she was completely numb to it all. Even so, she managed to smile. The look on the 3 alpha beowulfs' faces as her yellow dust vials exploded was priceless. It hurt like hell, but it was worth it. Ruby would be so proud. Soon the darkness around the edges of her vision closed in, eating up her remaining sight. The Schnee heiress let it happen without a fight. That was chapter 7. But, well, looks like we're on the final chapter, you guys. Fuck. That was just such description. I mean, like, I thought, like, there was, like, some sort of, like, super, like, depressing, like, goodbye, like, song from a score was going on in my mind as I was reading that, and I was like, oh, fuck. But here we are. Well, actually, I'm going to keep my water open just in case. But here we are. Chapter 8. The bond between them. It would be the sound of shuffling which drew Weiss from the haze of sleep. The Schnee heiress was lethargically blinking awake in the minutes following that sound. At first, she didn't know where she was, only that there was a dull pain throbbing in her torso and her entire body ached. Judging from the light coming through the open window nearby, she guessed it to be sometime in the early afternoon. What? Weiss immediately regretted trying to sit up. The moment she pushed up from the bed, pain burned through her body like wildfire. She quickly collapsed back into bed with a whimper. Weiss! A voice exclaimed next to her, making her flinch. You're awake! The white hair girl huffed tiredly, clutching at her ribs under the blanket. Blue eyes blinked heavily as they tried to focus on the blob of red and black in front of them. RWBY? God, her mouth was so dry, and her throat felt like sandpaper. Oh man, it's you and me both. Here, RWBY said, disappearing out of sight for a moment. The younger girl quickly returned with a cool glass of water and pressed the rim to Weiss's lips. Oh fuck, I could really go for some cold water. This is hot water I'm drinking. Speaking of hot water, I'm out. Weiss drank greedily, not realizing just how parched she was until then. Once the glass was empty, it was pulled away and set down. Weiss swallowed thickly before trying to speak again. What? Now a little bit more awake, Weiss noticed she was in her room, back in the dorm. How she came to be here, and more importantly, how the hell RWBY was here too, Weiss hadn't a clue. She was thankful for her soft bed, though. But most importantly, her current company. Though she would never have said that out loud. We're back at Beacon, RWBY said, noticing her concern. In your dorm. Weiss almost snorted at that response, though quickly dismissed the action, remembering how tender her ribs were. I figured that much out, you dunce, Schnee heiress said, annoyance clearly evident in her tone. RWBY smiled weirdly. What I was going to ask was, how did I get here? Weiss explained. Or rather, how did you get in here? She added a second later. Ruby looked away for a moment. What was the last thing you remember, Weiss? Silver eyes looked back at Weiss fearfully. Weiss stared at the red-cloaked girl for a moment before turning her gaze back to the ceiling. What was the last thing she remembered? Weiss's brows scrunched up as she probed her memories. They were a jumbled mess right now. Images and sounds overlapping each other in no particular order. There were beowulfs, a snowy white field, a ruined ghost town, a howl, dark silver eyes. The Beowulf! Weiss exclaimed, shooting up in her bed as everything came back to her in a flash. A split second later, Weiss's world was spinning, her vision darkening as pain spiked to incredible heights. She didn't even realize the choked pain screams sounding in her ears came from her. Weiss! Weiss barely heard the rushed footsteps racing towards her room as her body lurched over the edge of her bed like dead weight. Gentle arms embraced her before she could go too far. Weiss's head resting against something soft. The scent of roses drifted through the air. Blue eyes tiredly blinking as two forms came racing into her bedroom. Weiss! Ruby! That sounded like Yang. Is she alright? Blake was here too? Weiss felt a moment of vertigo before she was set back down in bed, ever so gently. She's alright, Ruby answered. Ugh. Ugh. Terrible me. Ruby answered, the concerned pair standing in the doorway. She just got a little excited for a moment. Weiss huffed. Excited? Well, that was an understatement. The chenille heiress turned to Ruby, opening her eyes when she felt the younger girl smooth some stray hair out of her face. She hadn't even realized she'd closed them. Yang visibly deflated with a sigh, a hand rubbing her face. Weiss, the blonde said, for all our sakes, please try not to get too excited until after you're healed up. I don't think any of us could handle you almost dying again. Whatever angry retort Weiss had on her lips for that lecture quickly dissipated. Weiss's gaze darted between the three in her room. What? She almost died? But how? How could she? Seeing her confusion, Blank was the first to fill in the blanks. It's been a week since we got back to Beacon, the black-haired girl explained. Weiss's eyes went wide. While in the end we accomplished our mission, it wasn't without casualties. Blake continued. She frowned. We were all worse for wear, but you, by far, bore the brunt of it. Yeah, Ning said, rubbing the back of her neck restlessly. I've seen some pretty scary things in my lifetime. But back then, when well, you know. Yang looked away, refusing to meet Weiss's gaze. You scared us really bad, Weiss. I'm not going to lie. Weiss swallowed thickly, letting this revelation sink in. What? Another swallow. What happened to that Beowulf? Two pairs of eyes snapped to Ruby. Ruby clenched her hands together tightly. I believe Ruby is the person to ask about that, Blake said, grimacing. Weiss turned back to Ruby. The younger girl reluctantly met her gaze for a moment before looking away. Yeah, about that. A week ago, confrontation with the Alpha Beowulf. Ruby yelped the moment her back hit the cold, snowy ground. She was tired and cold, and wanted nothing more than to sleep for a week. But she didn't have that luxury right now. Right now, she was facing down the hardest enemy she had ever faced before. And she was losing. Ruby still couldn't accept the fact that her mother was truly gone for good. She was right here, trapped inside of this Alpha Beowulf's body. She knew it. She could feel it. Somehow she just had to figure out a way to reach her mother and set her free. She could do it. She was Ruby Rose. But in the end, Ruby Rose was still a scared child, facing the monsters of old, and she was terrified. The Alpha Beowulf roared as it rounded on her, Ruby fighting herself, unable to move from her spot, half lying, half sitting on the ground. Crescent Rose shook in her grasp in front of her, the weapon suddenly feeling a lot heavier than Ruby remembered. As the alpha Beowulf raised its paw back to strike, silver-colored eyes squeezed shut. Ruby bowed her head. She couldn't do it. She couldn't kill her mother. And because of that, she was now going to die. Ruby! Then it happened. In a flash of red dust, Weiss was there. The white-haired girl dashing between Ruby and her attacker like a knight in shining armor. Ruby always loved fairy tales. Stories of good winning out against evil. That's partially why she wanted to become a huntress. To give people those happy endings as told in the stories. But Ruby had always seen herself as the knight, saving princesses from danger. Today was the opposite, however. Weiss being her knight, and Ruby being the princess. Then the cold, biting sting of reality set in. In Ruby's horror, she watched in almost slow motion of sorts as Weiss was batted aside and straight into a nearby tree. Weiss! Crack! Ruby went pale. A second later, Weiss's limp body tumbled into the snowy ground. And every single one of Ruby's rampant thoughts dissolved. Now there was only one thing repeating itself over and over in her head. Weiss was dead. Weiss was dead and it was all her fault. Then Weiss screamed. Weiss! The alpha Beowulf charged after Weiss, roaring in retribution. Ruby was forgotten. It would take it less than 10 seconds for it to reach the near mortally wounded huntress in training. Weiss barely keeping herself sitting upright at the moment. That's when something happened inside of Ruby. Something just changed. No longer was she paralyzed by fear. Well, that wasn't right. Ruby was still afraid. Terrified, actually. But it was a different sort of fear. Now there was only the fear of losing Weiss. Her colleague. Her teammate. Her friend. Ruby jumped to her feet and darted after the alpha Beowulf. Weiss! Ruby was Team Ruby's leader. The defender. The protector. What kind of leader got their teammates killed? Crescent Rose chain fired, pushing Ruby faster and faster across the snowy ground. She was practically flying at this point, but even with their current speed, she wouldn't be fast enough. The alpha Beowulf would reach Weiss first. Weiss! Ruby called again, panic in her voice. Her shout seemed to snap Weiss out of her stupor for a moment. The white-haired girl reaching for something in her side pouch. Before Ruby knew what happened, there was an explosion of lightning, and the alpha Beowulf went staggering backwards towards her. She had finally caught off. Swing! Crescent Rose tore through corrupted flesh and bone, black blood staining the ground at the alpha Beowulf's feet. It gave out a final cry and collapsed into the snow. Rest now, mother, Ruby said, breathless. Her beloved weapon was propped up on top of her shoulders, running parallel down the length of her arms in her signature ending pose. Your fight is over. A deep breath. I'm sorry it's taken this long for me to finally set things right. For a split second, out of the corner of her eye, Ruby saw something. Or rather, someone. They were cloaked in a white cloak, the inside lining matching her red one. The white hood covered the person's head, and while Ruby couldn't make out anything but the lower part of their face, warmth filled her chest when the person smiled. Ruby turned her head to get a better look at the white-cloaked person, only to find them gone. It was as if they never existed in the first place. Ruby sniffled, turning her attention back to the carcass at her feet. Silver eyes widened when Ruby remembered Weiss. In a panic, her gaze darted all around her until the red-cloaked girl found her. Weiss laid on the cold ground 20 feet away, having been blown that far by that lightning explosion. As luck would have it, she did not collide with any of the trees, but the snow underneath her was red, as was her dress in many torn spots. The Schnee air is deathly still. Ruby took off running. Weiss! Back to the present. Also, I actually had to stop for a moment to So you sent a picture of my dad's water bill to him. And so I got myself ice cold water. Yes, I know I had a perfect opportunity to say ice cold, but I didn't. Broken ribs, a punctured lung. Blake listed off Weiss's injuries. A heavy concussion, lacerations, and burns to 50% of your body. Tore muscles in your left arm. You were in really poor shape. Blake grimaced, looking to the side, lost in thought for a moment. Had your aura not been as strong as it was, things could have gone very differently. Weiss pursed her lips and frowned. She could have died, was what neither of the three girls wanted to say. It was as if saying it out loud would make it come true. Thankfully, Yang said, breaking the tense silence, that did not happen. And for a good reason, too. I, for one, was not ready to deal with that kind of thing, thank you very much. Yang gave Weiss a thumbs up. So keep being stubborn there, Weiss. A pause. In a good way, of course. The blonde added as an aside. Weiss blinked, not sure whether to take that comment as a compliment or an insult. Sure? Yang smiled. Unable to stop herself, Weiss smiled back. Now that that's over, Yang said, back to her regular cheery self, and all of that is behind us, I think it's time to get something to eat. Again? Blake questioned with a raised eyebrow. Did you just eat 3 hamburgers half an hour ago? Yang grinned, wrapping an arm around Blake's shoulders, making the other girl blush a little bit. Come on, Blakey. Ruby's older sister crooned. You didn't honestly think those snacks would keep me long, did you? Yang proceeded to drag the flustered black-haired girl out of Weiss's room and down the hallway with her. Blakey! Blake's voice faded down the hallway. Fucking saying Blakey, dude. Classic. Weiss stared at their bedroom door for the longest while. Just what the hell had been going on while she was out? Also, I'm eating a piece of rice. Hold on a moment. I don't really give myself the luxury of drinking ice cold water, because I drink mostly cola. But when I do, oh fuck, it's like I went to an oasis in the middle of a desert. A muttered curse drew Weiss's attention away from her bedroom door and back to the red-cloaked girl keeping her company. Ruby had a finger in her mouth, Weiss not missing the glint of red on the sharp edge of her prized weapon. Ruby? Ruby flinched at her voice, quickly wiping the bead of blood off the blade with a nearby rack. Sorry, Weiss, the younger girl stuttered. It's almost done. Blue eyes lowered and Myrna asked her, her weapon having never looked cleaner or more polished before. Vials of dust sat in a line on her desk, which was next to her bed. Ruby quickly reloading the revolving cartridges which powered Weiss's weapon. Ruby, I'm sorry, Weiss. Weiss frowned. Ruby's voice was so small, very much the opposite of what she was usually like. I am so sorry. Ruby clenched a fist, Weiss's eyes locking onto the shaking limb. Because of me, you got hurt and nearly died. Now Ruby's entire body was shaking. Both of her hands clenched her fists at her sides. Weiss spotted tears pooling in the corner of Ruby's tightly shut eyes. The Schneer eyes turned her head back towards the ceiling. No, Ruby, Weiss said. She swallowed thickly. I'm the one who's sorry. Ruby's head whipped towards her, the younger girl looking at Weiss in shock. What? Weiss took in a shallow breath, ever mindful of her ribs before sighing. She closed her eyes for a moment. The first day here, I could have been nicer. Under the blanket, Weiss's own hands scrunched into fists. Pride was not something Weiss swallowed lightly. More often than not, the Schneer is being correct in her judgment of people. RWBY and the rest of the team had been one of the few exceptions to her normally spotless track record when it came to figuring people out, and that was quickly spilling over into others like the members of Team Juniper. I shouldn't have been so quick to judge you. Not when all you were doing was trying to be nice. Weiss saw the red cloak wearing girl with an apologetic smile. I didn't have many friends growing up. I couldn't actually. Not when, well, after the accident happened and Mother died. Before Weiss could say anything further, she quickly found herself enveloped in RWBY's arms, their team's leader, her leader, sobbing into her shoulder. Oh, Weiss. Oh, that didn't sound... whatever. Weiss grimaced, biting her tongue when she reached over to rub RWBY's back, causing a twinge of pain in her stomach. I'm sorry, RWBY. The scent of rose just filled her nose. Weiss was smiling as that warm, happy feeling returned. I hope we can still be friends at least. RWBY sobbed louder, clutching at Weiss more tightly. In spite of her shuddering breaths, the white-haired girl heard her answer loud and clear. Of course! Hours later, Blake and Yang would return to check in on the pair. What they found would bring smiles to their faces. Weiss was asleep once again. RWBY also passed out, but not in the chair next to the heiress's bed this time. Instead, RWBY was curled up on the bed next to Weiss. Oh, shit. A week later. White platform heels marched purposely across marbled floor, straight towards the office of one Headmaster Ozpin. Upon reaching the door leading into the prestigious office, in a move which would make even Yang Xiaolong proud, the double doors to the headmaster's office were promptly kicked open before the owner of the white heels strode in without further hesitation. Oh my god. That would be fucking hilarious to actually see visually. Young lady! Glinda Goodwitch exclaimed. The blonde woman quickly recovering from her surprise to scold one Weishni. This is unacceptable. You can't just waltz in here. It's quite alright, Miss Goodwitch, Headmaster Osmond said. He currently sat behind his massive desk, casually drinking from his mug of hot chocolate. Small marshmallows floated at the top of it. I'm sure Mishni has important matters which require attention. Osmond set his mug down. By the way, I am relieved to see you recovering well from your injuries, Mishni. You had us all quite worried for a time. Spare me the pleasantries, Weiss snapped, her tone biting. Mishni! Glinda exclaimed again, glaring at the white-haired girl. You addressed Headmaster Ozpin. A hand on Glinda's wrist made the huntress pause. Please, Miss Goodwitch, Osmond said with a small nod. Huntress Glinda Goodwitch gritted her teeth, crossing her arms over her chest. Turning on her heel, she marched up to the spot next to the headmaster behind the desk on Osmond's left, and planted her feet. Now, Osmond said, turning back to his guest, to what do I owe this visit? A file folder flopped down onto the desk in front of the headmaster. One of the four file folders given out to Team RWBY just before their mission weeks ago. Upon opening it, Osmond would find a detailed report about the mission, along with other miscellaneous notes about the team's encounter with the Alpha Beowulf and Lesser Beowulfs, which took up residence near the abandoned town of Daggerhorn. Included in those notes were Weiss's own speculation on the Alpha Beowulf, that the creature had some sort of special ability to draw out buried emotions from its victims, and hence paralyzing them with it. As expected of one of Weiss's caliber, the report and notes were clear, concise, and extremely detailed. This was a key characteristic found in the most skilled hunters and huntresses currently in service. You knew, Weiss said, almost snarling. She pointed an accusing finger at the headmaster. You knew exactly what we'd find there, and yet you didn't do a damn thing about it. Weiss's voice was steadily increasing in volume and pitch. You set us up! Were you trying to kill us? Glinda bristled at Osmond's side, but a brief look from the headmaster prevented any further intervention on her part. Mishni, Headmaster Osmond began, fingering the folder on his desk. He would not get the chance to finish his words, however. Don't Mishni me! Snapped. Ice blue eyes glared at the headmaster, her left hand cutting through the air in front of her in aggravation. I'm not here to listen to your pathetic excuses. I'm here to deliver a message. Osmond raised an eyebrow at this, but said nothing. Pulls out a gun. I'm kidding. Putting my teammates in unnecessary danger like that again, and there will be dire consequences. Glinda couldn't take it anymore. Are you threatening us? She said, muscles tensing, the Huntress glaring daggers at the heirs to the Schnee legacy. The Huntress was ignored. If memory serves me correctly, Weiss began, I believe the Schnee Dust Company is a major financial backer of Beacon Academy. Isn't that right? The white-haired girl brought up her left hand to her face, suddenly finding her nails very interesting. Glinda shot the headmaster a questioning look, obviously not having not known such things. It would be rather unfortunate, Weiss continued, and detrimental to Beacon for them to suddenly, say, one day pull out due to irreconcilable differences. Wouldn't you agree? Ice blue eyes met unblinking brown ones. Huntress Glinda Goodwitch was livid. Are you blackmailing us? Weiss scoffed, barely giving the Huntress a passing glance. She wouldn't snort. Why Schnee didn't do such undignified things. Blackmail? Weiss laughed heartily. Hardly, the Ice Princess stated. I'm just simply reminding you both of how things are. You little... Thank you, Miss Schnee, Headmaster Osmond said. I will keep that under advisement. A cold smile. You do that, the Schnee heiress said. With that said, Weiss turned on her heel and stormed out of Osmond's office. The moment the white-haired girl was gone, Glinda rounded on the headmaster. Headmaster Osmond, she almost screeched. How could you allow such disrespectful behavior? Headmaster Osmond took a sip from his mug yet again, setting it down on his desk while nibbling on a marshmallow. Reaching to the right, he pulled out a scroll from the top right drawer of his desk. It was the same scroll he used to monitor the first-year students during initiation in the Emerald Forest. Turning it on, he immediately went to the camera feeds, currently overlooking a certain all-girls first-year team, involving red, white, black, and yellow. Headmaster Osmond, Glinda repeated when she didn't receive an answer. Headmaster Osmond smiled. Things are shaping up to be an interesting year. Man, son, I fucking love the story. By the way, that is it. That is it for Tell Me Something. Holy fuck. I am just reading through it again. It's provoking so many memories because it's still in 2013. That was when I was still writing. This story was still ongoing when I first started my first few stories, which were Red Like Roses, Death from Above, story that I pretend doesn't exist, and some other story that's way too explicit, but kind of gets suffered because of the whole I'm terrible at writing thing. But it's wow, like holy fuck, man, it's just so awesome. Just see this story again. I actually ended up writing like 5 stories during my first year. Yeah, the last one being some story that I pretend doesn't exist. But but I had a hell of a lot of fun writing the story. It was so much fun. I loved it. Also, I just realized something. Oh, never mind. I thought the story was gone from my, from my list. I'm looking at my stuff now. But to definitely say about this story is definitely one of those stories that provoked a lot of things for me. The one thing being the dark storytelling and sometimes like the bitter parts, like with Weiss Schnee like going on about her the accident that she was with her mother in, and then the whole like basically the whole like deception thing that Osmond was doing. I fucking love that shit. It was awesome. And I would later on start being more into dark storytelling because apparently I'm good at that shit, as I've been told. But other than that, like, I love stories like this because this was before like even like volume 1 had gone far. That's when the story started. Like, I think there was only like an episode or two of RWBY volume 1 when Tear of Light published the story. But they finished it at the end, like in December, and I believe that was when volume 1 ended, somewhere in December. No, it was in November. Yeah, it was in November. And it was such a goddamn good story. Fucking loved it. Now, pretty much I'm thinking that we're gonna be continuing on the whole Tear of Light trail, because I was actually going to read The Princess's Rogue long ago, but I never got around to doing it, and I fucking love that story. So I'm thinking that the next story that we're going to be doing is The Princess's Rogue. Now, I don't know if I should do another one-shot before starting another multi-chapter story, but we'll see what happens. So I'll keep I'm pretty much just letting you guys know that we might start with a one-shot. We might do a one-shot first before doing The Princess's Rogue. We might just be doing The Princess's Rogue a few weeks after this. But anyways, thank you guys so much for listening to this narration. I hope you guys have an awesome day. If you actually want to contact me in other ways, or you want to know what else I do, just look to the channel. Hit the subscribe button if you want to see more narrations. I'm trying my best to improve so that the next stories that I narrate are much better in quality in terms of how I narrate them. If you want to know what else I do, I also have a Twitter. Link in the link will be in the description. I also have a fanfiction account of my own. I was also writing in 2013 when I first started, but I don't really like those 2013 stories that I wrote. They're kind of shoddy in quality. And I also stream on Twitch, which you can find in the description, the link, or on my channel. It's actually one of the link tags that's on the channel art. So do that. I also have a Patreon if you want to support me in doing these narrations. I also use it too for my other things, but I'm just saying it because of this occasion. And that's gonna be it for me. I will see you guys in the next narration, and as always, stay classy.